Hello everyone. Today I want to show a game played between Anish, Giri and Levon Aronian. This was played in the 74th Wijk held in 2010. It used to be called the Who Governs Tournament, the Chorus Tournament, and now it's the Tata Steel Tournament. Let's check out the game. Anish starts with d4. We have d5, c4, and e6. The Queen's Gambit declined. Knight c3, bishop e7, knight f3, and knight f6. Bishop f4, castles, e3, and knight d7. D takes c4. Sorry, first bishop e2, and now once the bishop is moved, we make white waste a tempo and play d into c4. And white actually ignores the pawn and plays castles, and it was Aronian who made this line a little fashionable with white, interestingly, and now his own weapon is used against him. He plays knight b6, just defending that pawn. Queen to c2. Knight h5, going after that nicely placed bishop. Bishop e5, not going to g3 immediately. White really would not have too much of an advantage over there, and the knight would have favorable tension on the bishop anyway. And f6. Black wants to chase that bishop away and force it to go to g3. But knight g5, an interesting idea, opens the light squared bishop's attack on the black knight, and of course h7 is threatened, so there is no time to grab the bishop. You have to grab the knight to avoid checkmate, and now white grabs the knight. Black now has kept the c4 pawn permanently. There is no light square bishop attacking it, and there are reasonable chances for black to defend that c4 pawn, but the king side pawn structure is a little weakened. But there are some advantages for black as well, which we will see. Bishop d7. Just developing, and bishop f3. And here's the point, the f file is opened. While there is some structural weakness, we can say, in black's camp, Aronian decided to create the same for white by rook into f3, damaging the king side pawn structure for white now, and he has a pawn for the exchange. Bishop d6. If white were to capture, it would only strengthen black's pawn structure. Queen to e4 was played. However, the idea is, of course, to shift the queen, the queen to the king side, but Aronian in fact said that maybe it would have been better to put a knight on e4 and try to play b3 to dissolve that c4 pawn. That could have been one way to go. And another line, we can even check out bishop into d6 instead. If that happens, then c into d6. That improves the pawn structure. Queen a4 now, going after b7 and also threatening to go after the king side. Queen f6, developing the queen, and after b7 is grabbed, rook c8. The threat of bishop c6, queen into a7, and queen into f3. And black can get a draw here by queen g4, queen f3. That's possible. That is certainly possible. But after queen f, bishop c6 is played, so black gets a little time playing to place his pieces while attacking the white queen. Queen g4 and queen e7, just defending e6. Bishop into d6 now, c into d6, and knight e4. e4 could also have been a move, just blunting the black bishop, and h6. And this pawn structure in front of black's king is not too bad, and that c6 bishop could sometimes transfer to g6 and be tucked in the dark squared pawns, and in fact we'll see that happen later. Queen G3, D5 now, just so solidifying in the center, not letting D6 be a target for the white queen, securing C4, and of course, as we said, the C6 bishop will find a different home. Knight C3, Rook F8, the semi-open file, that's the right place for the black rook. Knight E2 and Rook F5, preventing Nf4 push, because that was one threat by white, F4, and then the knight would jump into F4 later on. King G2. And it's interesting to note, if Queen B8 check, then Knight C8 is interesting, because if the knight is captured, Rook F8 will trap the queen. So it doesn't really do much, and the knight can then be maneuvered towards the king's side. So King G2 is played. Knight to D7. The positioning of the knight should be improved. There isn't much. There's no need to defend the C4 pawn anymore. Rook H1. Maybe some H4 ideas to soften the king's side. But Knight F8. And this actually takes care of the H4 idea, because after H4, Knight G6. And this is fine, of course. Right now, H into G5 is impossible, because Rook into G5 will pin the white queen. So F4 was played, and Knight into H4 check. White doesn't want to give back the exchange. King F1 and Queen B4. So Aronian slowly but surely is making some progress, and now is going on the other side to attack. The queen, of course, can switch sides quite easily. Rook to B1, defending B2, and Bishop E8. And now we see a different diagonal for the bishop. Knight to C3. Queen goes back to E7. B4 and Rook F8. The bishop will come to G6 and then to D3. That's the idea of Rook F8. Rook to B2, Bishop G6. King E1. So trying to evacuate the king to the queen side and perhaps find some safety there. Bishop D3, an excellent outpost. F into G5, Knight F3 check first, King D1, and H into G5. And it's okay, while black has double pawns, there is more than enough compensation. Queen to H3, putting pressure on E6 and down the H file, but Queen F6. The F7 square is enough room for the black king. King to C1. Bishop goes back to G6, so now the idea is that you want a queen bishop battery, so bishop goes back. A4. Rook to D8. To push E5, you want to secure D5 first, and Knight E2. E5, trying to soften up white's center. Queen to G4, E takes D4, E takes D4, and Rook E8. Now the E file is open. Queen to D7. Puts pressure on D5 and on B7, but first C3, hitting the rook, and Rook A2. Now what black would really like to do to finish the game is get the queen on E4, and that would be a very strong threat. But it's not possible, of course. F4 is covered by the knight, so Queen F4 to E4 maneuver is not possible immediately. And Aronian finds a very creative solution. He plays Knight E1, threatening Knight D3 and some nasty discoveries then, so the knight should be captured. But now this pins the white knight on E2, and now Queen F4 check is possible, because if the queen were to be captured, then Rook into E1 would be checkmate. So King D1 now, and now the queen goes to E4, and this was enough for Anish Giri. White would have to, let's say, give up the queen into E8, bishop into E8, and that's more than enough. And also the C3 pawn is also there for black. So a very interesting game. It shows the power of an exchange sacrifice. Sometimes we overestimate the value of a rook versus a bishop, but yes. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon for the next game.